Let my vibes be one with you. Let my vibes be one with you. I only want to know you. I only want to know you. To know you is to love you. Is it too late? 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 To say it to you. The voice in the world. Oh, Mother Earth. From you come all material things. To you all things material go return. You is the heartbeat of man's survival. Mother Earth. Provider of food when I hunger. Fountain of water when I thirst. Oh, Mother Earth. In your womb, centuries of seeds does be planted. Blessed be the fruit of thy womb, Mother Earth. So much harvest you deliver, yet we take you for granted, Mother. Your beauty with the face, destroying the trees in the forest, distressing the ozone layer, polluting the waters with acid rain and toxic waste. I only want to know you. I only want to know you. To know you is to love you.
Good night, villagers. Music from the legend.
The one and only.
One and only.
Boy,
Brother
give
Resistance.
thanks, boy.
Rest in power, Brother Resistance. Rest
Lost a big one day.
Yeah. Rap so legend.
As usual, I find myself thinking how we never seem to celebrate people when they're alive in Trinidad and Tobago. So
Nice
much this
story.
man do. You know? And everybody go remember him now. Everybody go play all the music.
I mean, if you're one in the music, boy. And I mean, when you hear the music now, Torian, I mean, you feel that little special thing, boy.
It's
You know
true.
what I mean? You really, the man
It take me
really
back
produced that
to
spirit.
when you're 6 years old watching
You know what I
TV.
mean? When you play that, you know that meme where they say, you know, if she ain't know that, she too young for you,
Young,
bro.
too
Yeah, watch
young.
me. If she ain't know the Mother Earth, she too young for you, bro.
Yeah, but on a real, I playing that song long time now on Spotify. You know? You on that Spotify,
Right.
yeah, so I just ring it out every once in a while.
Yes. And what he hides, he dropped that song. When he dropped that song, boy, I was like 95.
In the 90s. But what you see,
95.
what now Brother Resistance was the head of Tuco, so he would have also been always referenced in the news because of that. But what people would have overlooked is the contribution he would have made to the overall landscape. Let's see you hearing me properly and stuff.
Yeah, right up.
Right. So, you know, the musical landscape was changed by the Network Rhythm Band. All right. The genre of rapso, right, as a viable art form, which would have spawned so many different acts, especially in the 90s, like Tricanal and so on, you know, which we grew up with. They are all proponents of what Brother Resistance created. And people,
Clan,
yes. And people don't realize that they were looked upon just like many other artists in their formative years as a nuisance, right? And as pests per se, right? Because their band practice area was I think broken down by the police, you know. Yeah, in the 70s. And you know,
the most rebels in their own right.
Yeah, so they were like pioneers of the entire like Black Power movement and all of that. You know what I mean? And you know, as on the musical side of things, they represented that part of the music that was there for revolutionary purposes. And as world beat musicians, they were recognized all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, and it's only then, you know, people started watching them like, you know, with a favorable eye here. Well, people who are in authority per se, you know. So it's very the story of Brother Resistance and Network Rhythm Band is something that I wish we should celebrate. And I read a post from Rubadiri Victor, who's another person very known for his take on the culture and being that cultural pundit, so to speak. And it's real eye-opening, the amount of impact these artists had within the communities that they came from.
Freetown too. Freetown is a real, a real
proponent,
messenger, that kind of,
yes,
that kind of vibe, Yeah.
Correct. So without Brother Resistance, we will not have all of this now. People may not realize that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
True.
we want to say, condolences to the family and to the musical community and Tuko and everybody on the loss of Lutalo Masimba, otherwise known as Brother Resistance. Moving on to our monologue today. So we have another piece of very, very sad news. We have the Haitian president being assassinated. It was very shocking, I would say, that in this day and age, we still have to hear that our CARICOM brothers and sisters, have their president being assassinated, But then again, does it really come as a surprise too to everybody when we look at the political climate of Haiti? I don't know.
Yes, them always unsettled.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, boy. Is like that situation can't settle down, boy. And I mean, you see a lot of people calling, because I was watching the article on CNN, because it get bigger, and they're talking about U.S. involvement and that kind of thing. They say that the people who was involved with the assassinations was mainly Colombians, and a lot of the Colombians who was involved in the assassination was former U.S. DEA informants now, boy. You understand? So because when the man come in with the original shots, he announced himself as a USDA agent, You understand what I'm saying? So it was a whole kind of sting operation, and then the military come in, end up shooting men, and right now it have like about 7 or 8 the whole, and that's 7 or 8 there now. And the reality is that people questioning, well, because the feds involved, you understand what I'm saying? So the feds saying, well, who really was responsible for it and why? So a lot of people talking it might be drugs, it might be linked to the US in some way. So, you look at yourself as an independent nation, but I mean, when you see things like this, is make you really wonder, You understand what I'm saying? How independent are we?
So
you know what I mean?
So when you say the feds involved, let's see, what were you ready judge?
The feds have an ongoing investigation right now.
Right.
It actually come up on Joe Rogan Experience. Joe Rogan actually talk about it as well too, where they were saying, well, there's a lot of DEA agents that might be involved in it as well too. So they're saying that it might be drugs that running through there, and that because the guy who they say mastermind the whole thing is a Haitian from Florida. You understand? Florida citizen.
Something.
You understand? So a former Asian citizen. So they say he was the one who basically try a kind of remote coup. You understand what I'm saying? And so all of that get tied up in that. So right now is the feds who investigating that whole thing to see, well, who it is to bring to justice and that kind of thing. But what they're finding out is some of their own people might be involved. You understand what I'm saying? So
I find that be the case too often though.
Yeah, well, you see, that is what it is going on there, you understand? But that's just to show you the heights that is not a simple, well, I mean, not that assassination is a simple thing, but, it just show the external forces involved in the whole thing now, right? You understand?
And it makes you wonder what kind of external forces what play with the last assassination we had here with Dina Sita Harlan as well. Because
that's right.
Up to now, we cannot get any closure on that. That is just something that will always be a stain on our conscience and our consciousness. So moving on to our PM now, we have the PM defends buying of new cars. So what we have here is Well, you see, ever since the report that I think Fane Richards did about, let me say, 5 years ago or so, maybe less, maybe more, I can't really remember exactly. And she interviewed Moni Lal and she interviewed a few others. I think Dial Singh as well probably was in the mix and thing, right? Asking them about the amount of vehicles that they purchase and the tax exemptions that they take advantage of. And you're getting all kind of figures about people buying all kind of 5 Range Rover in 2 years and all kind of things because they buy one
Munilal
for
was
their
one of the
brother.
main culprits.
Yeah. And you know, this has always been somewhat of a talking point when it comes to these ministers and them and what they do for we and they buying this and that and the other. Now Mr. Rowley came out and said that how people coming out, they came after Stuart Young for buying a luxury vehicle, right? And
$500,000 luxury vehicle.
Right.
Mercedes-Benz GLE 450.
Yeah, big boy, big Porsche, or big Porsche, right? But you know, and then Kito Salain, he boy get dragged so he say, I bought a car too. You understand? But that is he say that is my money, right? I work hard for my money. Part of my job is to use this vehicle to do my job, to go from place to place and engage in my 24-hour job. Who are you to tell me how to spend my money? And then do the classic thing that your boy like to do, right? Do the classic thing in the same breath, say why it is all and talk about the people who thief money blatantly, meaning the opposition, right? The opposition. So
deflect and parry.
That they are tough, I understand. So but you see, it goes to show you just how petty the thinking is when faced with a challenging voice from the people, which is that not about how you spend your money, you know. It is about how do you show a population that is in this unprecedented pandemic time, crisis, right? Where you know for a fact we are in the second lockdown, right? And that the economy has taken hit after hit, right? Even before the pandemic, we have had the closing of Petrotrin and the closing of Metal and closing of all these industries that have led to so many people being unemployed, underemployed, and so on. And now it's gone to a whole other category. Do you really need to get a new vehicle right now is the question now. And to them, it's like, yes, them could do what they want. Not understanding that it's all about the optics of it now. It's not about
time and place.
It's a time and a place. Do you really need it? Because right now, people out here are really suffering. Now, the thing is, people are always suffering. So why should they? They can make real arguments, but at the end of the day, it goes to show, just like when the minister, I think Cox, said that how people, they stand up in line for hampers because they are greedy. This all shows a level of disconnect. All right, it's a level of disconnect. You know,
I just want to say, Munilal.
Taurean, behave.
And you see that disconnect.
I'm not behave until I get my Prado, my tax.
And then you see that disconnect continuing on, apparently, from what I'm seeing with the schools now, where all your union cutter saying apparently that all getting consulted.
Yeah, well, that's a normal thing. Tutor has tutor.
But what tutor really want? What they really want? What they want?
Tutor wants that going forward with any major plan for the education system, that in the planning, tutor is consulted in the planning, so that they can actually have an input in the planning of the rollout of going back to school, besides hearing what is the rollout and then having to say, but why this, why that, why the other, because we, as the majority, tutor as the majority union, right, represents the workers. And if it is that, you know, you're going to do these things that unprecedented, you might as well bring people on board for that. And that's all that tutor is asking
But
for, a little bit of respect
I
in that
hear you,
regard.
Fata, but if I read this correctly, just go up to the top of the article there, Torian.
Oh, sorry. They feel disrespected.
Right. But they're saying they boycott the stakeholder meeting, but wouldn't the stakeholder meeting be to consult with tutor and then?
No,
So why they boycotted
the plan has already been rolled out. So it was a meeting. It was a meeting to tell you, look, the plan here. So it is not consultation. It's dressed up as consultation. And as Butch is saying, consultation is the law. So you know.
So what it is? It's like they're saying, but what is it they're saying? That schools opening back in September, and all you gotta walk with all your blue soap and thing?
Not exactly, but it's all still. Again, there was a next whole thing about the document that has been leaked. Maybe the real document, it may not. It may be, it may not. But what's really happening is that that the document has been circulated between all important stakeholders, and it shows that most likely we're going into what the hopeful situation of blended learning, where like you have half class coming out, half class online, that kind of thing, and obviously strict protocols, no assembly, that kind of thing. So it's something that we have to pay attention to, because reopening our schools is a real, it's something.
A real sensitive one.
Everybody's struggling with that right now, to be honest. Everybody's struggling with that right now.
So at this point in time, I want to bring on our guest we have for tonight to deal with the topic of, is climate change real? Which is what you all would have seen in our ad that was out there. We're going to get into another topic in the news, but we'll bring them on first and get into that topic. So first of all, we have, I was going to bring on our next fella, but I'm going to bring on this fella right now. Omar has been serving. Omar has been serving the Copper Foundation as its Chief Executive Officer since 2018. He has been the Sustainable Development Program Officer from 2009 to 2014, and he is certified in environmental, human rights, and climate change communication. Welcome tonight, Omar, to the program. The first time on.
That's right.
I think he muted still. Omar muted still, I think.
Yeah, good now?
Yeah. Welcome,
yes,
Omar.
Thanks. Looking forward.
Right.
Nice.
And we have also no stranger to the show. Okay. Right.
Hector Corazon.
Hector Corazon, otherwise known as Faraz Abdool, a freelance conservation and wildlife photographer who specializes in birds. Right. And he has always been known to be passionate about wildlife, about the earth, about the environment, and the preservation of such. Welcome, Faraz.
Thanks, my brother, and thanks for having me. Good to be here again.
Yeah, man. Bless up. So yes, we have warm faces here. Some familiar, some not so familiar. Let's get started.
Yes.
So the first thing I want to bring up is another news story recently in the news where Greta Thunberg slams world leaders on the Gulf of Mexico fireball disaster, and I'm not really too informed about this. So maybe Leslie could tell us about that whole story and what your thoughts on that.
Torian, you could bring up the video there, Torian. If not, let me share it here, because I want people to see, to get a vibe as to. I'm gonna share my screen. Yeah. For people to understand what is really going on there now. You understand? So
that's in the ocean.
This is in the ocean, right? Looking like the pits are hell open. You understand? And this is the Gulf of Mexico, where just a few years ago, remember, it had this whole issue with BP and the Deepwater Well Horizon and that kind of thing. Literally men on the water and have fire trucks trying to out water. You understand? So I don't know if salt water could out, that kind of fire. But that's to tell you how bad it was, that kind of space. I mean, look at that thing. It's like Godzilla coming up there. You understand what I'm saying? So you have a situation where you have this fire going up there. So
Lassie, did you end yourself?
no,
All right, yeah,
yeah,
Lassie, you're back with me.
right.
You end the video and you
So
end yourself same speed.
right. So what Greta's saying is that is apparently it's an underwater gas leak is what caused it, right? And the point that she making is that this is the world they're leaving for us. The same, future oil companies. What we really doing now? What shocked me, fellas, is that Greta come out and say this, but I really ain't hear about Greta for a while. Close to a year or two, I ain't hear nothing about Greta. I know when she and Trump was going at it, a lot of people were saying, well, she was just a cog in the wheel for the Democrats. And, you know what I mean? She got a lot of publicity. They fly she over for the New York summit and this kind of thing. But I really ain't hear about she for a while. And then she jump out with this.
But when you say and
Where Greta was,
you mean in
I
mainstream
ain't
media?
hear from she. You understand?
Okay.
So I mean,
But
I know somebody, Omar, if you could jump in, but where Greta was?
Well, I mean, I don't know her personally. We haven't pitched Marvel in years, but I think this is something that working in an NGO, not maybe the most activist of NGOs, but you always get that sort of almost like an entitlement of people to say, well, where's so and so, or why is so and so not here? But the fact of the matter is that you can't be everywhere at all times, and
Right.
I think in many cases, like when you're not hearing the siren, sometimes that means that maybe the siren at that point in time isn't that necessary, or maybe it's off somewhere else. Maybe the ambulance went somewhere else to focus attention. I think the main reason you used to hear about it so much is that there was that you had Trump and the 4 years of sort of climate denial, and the US is the controller of global media, so she's going up against him. So you would have that happening a lot. But I think once it's not in that kind of frame, the media is probably not going to pay attention. But I think on one hand, I think maybe attentions are just diverted somewhere else. But I think also it's you can't really expect, and we shouldn't expect one person to be this sort of what's the word, ubiquitous kind of champion for this all the time.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Mhm.
I
She
hear
had
you.
to sleep sometime.
But
Yeah,
at the same time,
sorry, Kota, go ahead.
yeah. Well, you carry on, Faraz.
Yeah, I'll just also add that, Greta is part of a global network of young people who are very concerned about what's going to happen with their immediate future. A lot of them are very, very young. And she has been doing a lot of things in the past year, as someone was saying, let's say you're watching too much Western news, boy. But yeah, the Americans do control a lot of the global media, and if you're not abreast as to what is going on, you're not going to know, right? And if you're not involved in the field, so just recently she released a video about the biomass industry in Europe, and she, alongside with a bunch of other young people, have been doing that. And young people have been standing up for the climate for a very long time. I don't know if you all remember, when we were small, there was a show called Wildlife with David Suzuki. That show, right?
Yeah, he's a general.
Right. So David Suzuki's daughter, Seven, spoke at, I think it was the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And that was in 1992. And it was a similar kind of scene, it's just like, I'm a child, and what are they really doing into our future? And she was 12 at the time, and they just like, we might just see her, we might see Greta, we might see like one or two other people, but these are just the children who the media picks up on, or who the media determines is going to make a so-called good story, right? Which I vehemently oppose that, because at the end of the day, these are children, right? And they are big men and women with daughters, and even without daughters, it doesn't matter, right? But you're making fun of and you're ridiculing a young girl. You're plastering her picture everywhere. You're sharing and basically, I think it's a wrong thing to do for a child that is genuinely standing up for something that she believes in, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
some might say that the fact that she is a child, and even the one before, they might use that fact to underscore this whole how to put it, theory that they are pawns, that they are given an agenda, that they are like actors almost, and that because they are children, that it is harder for people to, as you say, in the same way that you would say these are children, is like that is why they are put there. What do you say about people who think that?
right. So what I think about is, like, if you've ever seen people like begging for money, and they would send a child to beg for the money, right? And then the child would, inherently a child has these kinds of the innocence, and you feel sorry for them, and you tend to empathize with the child, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, you ain't gonna hit the child a hard slap, right? You wouldn't wait for the child there, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what the child is doing, you would not do it. So what makes it okay to then abuse Greta?
But
Exactly.
then so let me pull from that question that Torian just pulled up there from Jesus Degans. Uh, so what the message? What is the message that she bringing? And I want to just pull back Omar. What is Greta's message? Because in July 2019, she was supposed to speak at the French Parliament, and the French Parliament boycotted that speech, calling her the guru of apocalypse and the Nobel Prize for Fear. She was given the Time Magazine Person of the Year for 2019. But I think sometimes, the message could be lost. What is her message? That
Well, I
time
mean,
is running out.
I think you said it there. I mean, yes, I think her approach, and I mean, maybe it's a Scandinavian thing, but it is kind of doom and gloom. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that it is a doom and gloom situation, especially for places like where we come from. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, about the whole Paris Agreement and emissions and what that means. But the fact of the matter is that they could say what they want in terms of the French Parliament, but you have places that are literally getting submerged. You have people exploring land in Australia to move their country. I mean, it is a doom and gloom situation. And I think it's the epitome of putting your head in the sand if you want to boycott the message. And yes, it's understandable. Science kind of proves that you get kind of, what's the word? You get kind of almost insensitive to when you keep hearing bad news over and over and over, and you sort of shut it out. And I think that might be what might be happening in some extents, but I think in many cases willful ignorance, and it's a very easy excuse to make. Oh well, I don't want to listen to that because it's bad, when in many cases you just don't want to hear it yourself, or it's a
Right.
level of guilt that you're probably feeling.
Yeah. But let me still ask this to Omar. When she was having this big sort of showdown, this Western style showdown with Trump, they actually had a summit where they interviewed Putin about, and he was the next one that they wanted her to take on. And Putin said, someone needs to, explain to this girl that the world is very complex and that she doesn't understand how complex things are. And one in the one of her keynote speeches, that was the one in September, when it really sort of brought her on the world scale. She said, she had mentioned that people have fairy tales of eternal economic growth. And later on, I want to bring that concept of what dreams that she had, bringing that specific. Is that a fairy tale or is that a reality? That desire for eternal economic growth, because that seems almost like a inescapable reality that we sort of brought within. So if Omar, you could comment, and then we'll bring in Faraz to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's maybe a fairy tale. Maybe it's a slightly different way than maybe you're asking a question. I think it's a fairy tale that people probably told themselves, that you have infinite possible growth, and that the economy will just keep growing infinitely. So I think that is the fairy tale she's talking about, that people were kind of raised up to believe, which is not true, which is a fairy tale. So I think, and just to come back to what Faraz was saying, I mean, with all of these world leaders trying to tell this girl that the world is complicated, yes, I mean, that's why she's saying that you all need to listen, because the politics are complicated too, but the science is also complicated. So you can't be shifting, trying to shift your responsibilities by putting a girl on blast like a child. It's
yeah. Faraz, what you think about that?
I think like we have to look at the what economic growth is and what it is based on, right? And if you look at how the economy is, what is based on, and you break it down, when you really break it down to the brass tacks, right? It is based on natural resources, right? And the manipulation of some of these natural resources and the flow of goods from here and there and whatever. But infinite economic growth that is based on natural resources and the presence of natural resources is being taken to be something that can happen on a planet that is finite, right? So you want something that's infinite to come out of something that is finite, and that makes, no matter how you look at it, that makes no logical sense.
Yeah, I mean, I want to challenge that, but we'll come back to that. I want to pull the meat of the conversation for we to dive in the mud straight. Is climate change real, Omar?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a simple question.
Yes, you say climate change is real. When you say real, what do you mean?
So I think we have to. I mean, it's good to talk about. It's good that we're talking about climate change, and that we're discussing it.
What is climate change?
Yeah, so I think we have to kind of get settled on two things. One is that the actual debate about climate change is a political one, because the actual scientific consensus is, if not 100%, it's statistically close to 100%, because the science is there. I mean, you have 800,000 years of climate evidence, and it shows. So climate change, when you talk about climate change in the kind of big umbrella thing, is really three things. So one is that the climate is changing in many places, getting warmer, and that's because primarily of a rise in emissions, primarily carbon dioxide, and that rise in emissions is caused by human behavior and human action. So that's like the three pillars. Right. And again, like I said, you have evidence going back 800,000 years that shows that emissions are related to an increase in temperature. You drill cores in the ice, you check the composition of the air bubbles that are trapped inside, you get how much carbon dioxide, you melt the ice, you check the isotopes, you get a proxy for temperature. And that relationship has been steady over 800,000 years. So if you apply that same logic to the science now, you have the fact that rising emissions are causing rising temperatures, and it's the steepest it's ever been over that 800,000 year period. And the fact is that science exists for a reason. You have testable hypotheses that you can rigorously approach and validate and replicate. And the fact is that that's been done significantly. So the consensus is there. So if anyone says there's not consensus, that's coming from a ideological position, because the science is completely there. So any debate around it is from a political perspective, which
Right.
is related to how to deal with the impacts. And even as far as going back to what is the cause, because we all know that there are issues of colonialism and all that kind of thing. People don't want to take responsibility for what's happening now. So in a long answer, yes, it is real.
Now,
Okay.
I would say that that's the clickbait title we have there now. Is climate change
Mm-hmm.
real now? But we can the majority of people know and agree, even people with agendas per se of different politics and whatever, that it is real that the climate changes. But then they would come with certain arguments, basic arguments. The climate is always changing. You will
Which
also
is true.
hear, which okay, right? You'll also hear the the argument made that the same thing, the pillar you talked about, in the sense of that human engagement, human activity, and emissions and so on, that is what is causing the climate to change at a rapid rate. And that is where the real crux of the debate, I would say, comes from now, which is how much is human activity causing this change? How much of a change is it? And then we could get to other things. But let's see, maybe you might want to get in there with something
Yeah,
too.
yeah. So for me, I don't think we've left the point of whether it's real or not yet. I think yes, that argument of the contribution, the anthropogenic contribution of it, and then talking about how to treat it, we'll deal with that. But I still don't see this as being, because it's Omar is right. A lot of what people use is that word consensus or settled science to basically speak to 99% of research papers essentially stating, well, the climate is changing, global temperatures are rising, and therefore, and there's some connection with the actual amount of carbon that's being put into the atmosphere. But it would be remiss of me to say that 99% is 100%. That's not true. There are some researchers, and there are two I could pull out. A guy called Willie Soon that actually has a theory that solar irradiation is actually what causes that rise in temperature, not the additional carbon in the atmosphere. And he has several different references. He is a researcher for the Harvard Center for Astrophysics, and that solar irradiance theory has to do with attributing that temperature rise to the closeness of the Earth to the sun, because remember, we don't exist on a plane with the sun and stay in equidistant across time. We actually move helically within the broader universe. So at different periods, you're actually going to find the Earth being closer to the sun at certain points in time or not. If I could just share with you this chart, which is something that I think people should see, right? So this chart, I don't know if you've seen it clearly enough here. So this chart shows the rise in temperatures from 1850 to 2000. It's a famous research that was done by Berkeley University. They were sort of the pioneers for establishing the new average temperature of the Earth. Let me see if I could come back there, right? And when it is they put that up, if you notice that basically takes the temperature from 1850 to now using land satellites, all right? So what they're actually saying is, as it stands now in 2021, there are certain places on the Earth that are actually colder than it was before. But what they did is that how researchers, there's a specific methodology where they take the average temperature at certain stations across the Earth using satellite technology. But that technology only existed in the early 1800s. So what I am saying from an objective person's perspective is that if we only have data from 1800 to now, and I challenge anybody to find data before 1800. I know, Omar, you mentioned 800 years, but I couldn't find anything going back before 1800. And what it's showing is that it has temperature rising steadily from there. But what happened before 1800? This same paper from Willie Soon spoke about the Maunder minimum, where he established um, the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age. So 400 years ago, a guy called Keegwin, 1996, would have done research where he did use carbon dating to estimate the temperature of the Sargasso Sea that actually showed that 400 years ago, a period they call the Little Ice Age, the Sargasso Sea was 1 degree cooler. And 1,000 years ago, the medieval warm period, we were actually 1 degree Celsius warmer. So to me, the science in my mind isn't settled that we are actually warmer now. Now, another slant of the research, when you actually look at it, also tells you that Venus is actually much closer to the sun than the Earth, and Venus is 900 degrees on its surface. And the reason for that is because nearly 100% of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. So that is an argument in the direction that if we keep, putting carbon in the atmosphere, we're going to end up like Venus. I know I throw a lot of things at you all there, but perhaps if we could start some unpacking. I see Faraz smiling there. What do you think about that? Is it settled science that climate change is real? That we're warming?
Yeah, I know of at least one study that was done in 1999 of one of the ice cores in Antarctica, and they managed to get the climate history of the past 420,000 years, right? So yeah, like the data is there. It's not just a few hundred years or whatever. But I think I just want to say that it's one of our major fallacies of the human condition. Then would be to scale things by our lifetimes, right? So let's just say that our average lifetime is let's just say 100 years, right? Then we think if something takes 100 years, that's a real long time, right? If something takes 500 years, that's a real long time, right? That's even longer. But in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the history of the earth and geological cycles and all of these kind of things, plate tectonics, they all move at a much slower scale, right? So for something to change, and for some, like I'm sure you all noticed, there have been things that are happening now that weren't happening when we were younger, right?
Correct.
Look, this year we actually got a named Atlantic storm in May. So that's even before our usual hurricane season, and that happened for the first time now, right? We get adverse weather warnings in the dry season. So these are things that are happening and that are clear consequences of something that's different. But yeah, like you're right. There's a bunch of things that you threw at us. So what I would like I think I would just take a little drink of water now and let Omar take over.
So yeah, I think you're right on a couple of things there, Leslie. So again, like what Faraz was saying, you have a lot of this data was collected by this organization called the British Antarctic Survey. So they've been doing this for decades, going and drilling in the ice. And you have you have the longest, the furthest back is 800,000 years. And then you have like 100,000 years in Greenland or whatever. And you do that same thing where you check the trapped air bubbles, you melt the ice, you check isotopes and whatever. And so that you're able to map out this, geologic time. And you are right that the earth does get warmer because you change your motion. And so if you look at this graph, you'll see 800,000 years, and you'll see literal up and down, up and down. And that's where you have your ice ages. So you have these glacial and interglacial periods that last about 100,000 years. So it gets really cold, then it gets back warm, it gets cold and gets back warm, and it lasts about 100,000 years each. So that is correct, that it actually does, it is caused by your position around the sun on that plane. But again, like I said, you could effectively map out this 800,000 year history, and there's a little spike at the end, which is where we are, and you'll see that we're above the average in terms of temperature and emissions. So that by itself says a lot. And and you also have a lot of people saying, well, how could you have global warming when places get cold? And there's a reason that people have stopped using this term global warming, because that was the initial term. People say, oh, it's global warming because you're trapping heat and again warmer. But so they've kind of moved away from using that because it's, like you said, some places are getting colder, which is true. Because, you know, you've heard about like polar vortex and all those kind of things.
Right. Yes.
So, and it's all related to, you know, so, and this is where, again, it's a complicated system. And that's what I think, it's so big to comprehend that people sometimes find it easier to just say, well, that's not true. So basically, some places get colder because you have like this jet stream that goes around the northern hemisphere, which regulates temperature. And you have sort of heat pushing up from the equator, making that jet stream go like this. So you actually have bigger dips instead of going like that. It starts to go like this. So you have these vortexes reaching all the way down to like the southern United States or whatever. And then you have melting ice, which reduces salinity of the Atlantic Ocean, which affects how your currents and stuff pass. So the currents that bring warm water and cold water get all, get all screwed up. And you have temperatures changing because of that. So it's climate change as opposed to just global warming now.
Than just global warming.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean that one of the things that I want to point out, guys, is that just to put in perspective, this is the second time I think we touched lightly on climate change on the first episode with Faraz of the Heights Room. Faraz, I know it's so long ago that you know, I know if you remember it. But the intent is that this is such a complex topic, people. We gradually unpacking the bigger chunks of it. So we have about 6 different parts we want to unpack in this episode. But definitely we expect more episodes to come where perhaps we focus a little more on these climate change deniers, you know, and the science behind it and why it's not actually correct and that kind of thing. Because another point I want to make, which I thought a man from the comments would have hit me, is that this Willie Soon guy is actually funded by Exxon. So I mean, I hope you know what I mean. Is once a man dig a little deeper, he actually got 1.25 million funded by the Koch brothers and Exxon. So it's actually the big fossil fuel producers that are actually funding his research.
Yeah.
So that's another point.
Whenever you have this kind of point of view, the first thing that you do is Google the name and find out who funded this study.
Right. But then I could ask the question, who is funding IPCC's research? And even that seems to be quite a nebulous kind of world as well, from what I understand. But let me take it from right there for us. Let me take it from right that point. All right. The scientific consensus, and it is deemed to be settled science, that climate change is real and happening, and that it has to do with the anthropogenic contribution to humans putting carbon into the atmosphere. There's a study that, and Greta keeps talking about it, that 100 companies across the world contributes to 71% of this carbon, what they call in the carbon budget. I don't know if somebody could explain the carbon budget, because she was explaining it along the lines of, we have a rapidly declining carbon budgets, and we have basically 420 gigatons left before we break that 1.5 to 2 degrees limit, and that we're actually expending 4.2 gigatons of CO2 per year, and that 100 companies is what contributing to that. 25 companies contribute to 50% of that equivalent carbon contribution. I don't know if Omar, you could come in here and talk a bit about what the carbon budget is and just kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically that, they have this ceiling of 2 degrees Celsius. You want to rise your maximum rise of 2 degrees Celsius over your pre-industrial levels. That's what the level is, which is still horrible for us. That's by the way. It's good for
how
other
horrible?
people.
How horrible? What that means if you cross 2 degrees, isn't that I gone dead?
If you're living here, probably. Because the fact of the matter is,
right.
You're increasing. If you go from 1.5 to 2 degrees, Atlantic hurricane is going to increase by almost 75%. That's saying a lot. And that's just one effect. So basically, that 2 degrees Celsius, you have that's equivalent to a certain amount of carbon dioxide emissions. So they've calculated it, and I don't know the exact figures, but it's basically saying that you have to, if you burn this, okay, so the ceiling that you're allowed to burn in terms of fossil fuels to reach that ceiling is, I think, you have to leave 88% of coal or 80-something% of coal in the ground. You have to leave, I think it's almost 50% or something of oil in the ground. And you have to leave 40% or something of natural gas in the ground. Because if you go above that, then you'll be putting emissions into the atmosphere that can't necessarily right now be easily removed. So that's like the budget that you have. So you're allowed to burn 12% of coal, 50% of oil, 60-something% of natural gas. And the fact is, I mean, some things have changed, like BP, for example, with their campaign, but there's a 2019 study, finance study that looks at capital expenditure of the top 10 oil giants. And every single one has signed on as a climate champion, by the way. Yeah. But each one has capital expenditure for at least the next decade that relies on being able to burn more than that budget. So that's a very interesting thing to think about.
So they're just talking then?
Well, I mean, BP's green net zero thing is slightly, I think, more positive, I think, than some of most of the others, because they're setting some stronger targets. But effectively, most people playing this game with the budget, basically, which is not a good thing for any of us. So, and that's why, like, I personally have issues with like trading carbon, because you're just given an excuse to keep putting it out there.
Right.
So yeah, so that's where it becomes real political, and who trying to push off their responsibility on somebody else, who trying to give a guy money to plant trees so I could burn oil, that kind of stuff.
So like they're gaming the numbers then.
Well, I don't know. I think they're gaming in general. I think numbers or otherwise.
Like Man City.
But then tell me this then. So if it is we saying 420 gigatons is, and this is coming from the COP25, right? 420 gigatons, because to me this is a kind of staggering number that essentially once we cross that, we're going to end up in a 1.5 degree to 2 degree average temperature rise. And currently we burn in 42 gigatons of CO2 a year. If it is the top 10 oil producers is the ones who really contributing to this, why should we in the Caribbean and I out here in the Pacific, why should we care if we contributing so little compared to them? In other words, they are the ones making that big contribution to the carbon. Why should we be part of this fight? I don't know, Faraz, if you could chime in on that.
Well, I think it's, for me personally, especially, is a matter of conscience. If I am not in the fight to oppose the destruction of our natural world, right? If I'm not in that fight, then I'm fighting to destroy it. You understand? So yeah, so like I think it's a matter of conscience that we really need all hands on deck, right? In a sense of, well, we had to fix this, and every little bit matters, right? Because a lot of us here in the Caribbean and in smaller and the global south especially, we feel disempowered, right? In terms of being able to
Yeah.
have any kind of impact or whatever, right? But we're all consumers. We're all and in a look, Dennis is now talking about that, right? That us as consumers, if we can change our behavior, right, and we can choose more sustainable practices for ourselves, then we'd be able to have a trickle up effect on some other facet of the economy, right?
But let me challenge that for us. Let me challenge that a little bit in the sense that Greta has two specific dreams in particular. And to me, I think she's one of the real impressive leaders in terms of climate, changing and bettering the environment in some way. And it really is. She's the epitome of the older people saying, is you young people turn, and we as young people coming up is like, yeah, but it's all you who caused the problem. You understand? But two dreams that she talked about. One, the dream of eternal economic growth. And that to me is something we would try and unpack perhaps in another episode, talking about can when is when do billionaires say I have enough money? Because that
Oh,
is what fueling the whole argument. One, and two, when does the world say we have enough power? All right. The other part of that of the dream, so the other big dream that she has is that, and she spoke about this when she blanked attending the COP26 because she labeled the COP25 a failure, and she said she didn't want to participate in the COP26. And she started speaking directly to people now because she spoke about the issue of the inequity in the climate struggle, that third world developing nations are just being pushed to the forefront. Well, you all need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And the people who is most vociferous in that is the big producers, who is the US, the
right, the
um,
G7.
the G7, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
one of the big contributors to this is US land land use oil producers. So that is like when you see people trying to pull oil from the land itself. We know in Trinidad we have a lot of that as well. Apparently, the fugitive emissions that come from those wells are actually very dangerous emissions that are not just carbon, but is methane, which is 80 something percent
Hmm.
more dangerous than carbon itself. But to bring it back to the dream, what she's saying in the dream is that the people is the one that holds the power. But
Yeah.
fellas, I'm not seeing that. I'm not
Well,
seeing that the people really have the power. I mean, she doing all this striking and everything,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
seeing as the people. Talk to
Well,
me.
the thing is, right? The people or whoever it is that are very concerned about this thing, they are fighting a very big and powerful entity, right?
Hmm.
So this is an entity that I want. Let me just use you
Which is the
imagine
power
a little
mafia.
bit, right?
That's what it is. It's the power mafia.
Right? It ain't only it is power and money, right? And this whole entity, right, is something that pervades the whole world, right? And the entity needs certain resources to keep alive and to sustain itself, right? And this entity is something that continues to grow, continues to grow, and continues to grow. So it needs more and more resources as it gets bigger, right? That entity is something that is not going to take kindly to any attempts to undermine its efforts to get bigger, right? Or to maximize profit, right? And if you really break it
Yeah.
down, it's like, how did the G7 countries get so rich, right? Did they have the resources, right?
Mm,
It at the end of the day, it is very simple, right? In terms of climate change, it is a number
mm,
of people on the planet, and it
mm-hmm,
is this entity that I'm talking about, which some people call capitalism,
mm-hmm.
right?
Omar,
Uh,
what do you think about that? You think the people still have the power?
Well, I mean, it depends where you are, because I
Right.
think
Right.
you've had a lot of results from those like strikes, the climate strikes. So you've had results in places where, again, where you have an engaged population and you have citizenry who vote on things like issues and not on other reasons that we mightn't talk about here. Um,
Mhm.
but I think it's really important to note, and I mentioned it, I think, earlier, that the debate is a political one, not a science one. And there's
Mm.
a lot of research now, at least in the last 5 years or so, that the main driver of climate action by people is not their education or their wealth or whatever, is their political ideology. So that actually determines what you do around climate change. So because it's because I mean, like in the US, for example, and I don't like to talk about the US a lot, but that's where you have a lot of information about.
Mhm.
Republicans used to drive environmental championing in like the 70s and
True.
80s.
True.
Yeah,
True.
like so,
Correct.
but that widening has happened over the last last couple of years in particular, where you have um, you know, environmental issues are like a liberal thing, and
Yeah.
conservatives wherever you are in the world, it's you're against it because it threatens jobs and economies and whatever else. And I think what's important is being able to talk about it in a way that meets both sides.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important, especially for places like here, like in Trinidad, where has anyone talked about climate change on a political platform? Like,
No,
have you ever,
Hmm.
exactly?
no.
Because people
Hey.
don't show them that they care. I mean,
Exactly.
so that's
Wow.
that's exactly it. I
Yep,
mean,
yep.
but I mean, like Faraz was saying earlier, you have like I did some work about a year or two ago interviewing Gen Z, well, self-proclaimed Gen Z climate activists here. And
Mm.
again, these are people in like Form 6 who want to go and protest, but when we was in Form 6, you had to
Right.
ask permission or whatever. So
Right.
they,
Right. Right.
they,
Right. Right.
they're getting kind of stuck halfway. But the fact is that you have people now trying to activate that. So I think the people have the power where traditionally they would have had the power anyway. Not in countries
Mm.
where I think you might not have as an engaged citizenry. But
Right.
you have seen the impacts in other places where public opinion actually moves the needle a little bit.
Right.
So
Right.
I think again it depends where you are, what kind of politics you have, I think in particular.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
And
like
yeah.
the fossil fuel industry has been for the majority of our life, well, my lifetime and the lifetime of our parents and so on, that has been the bread and butter of the
Mhm.
nation. And we have had, the episode on that whole industry and how much people, have depend on that industry and all. You remember how much you talk about
Mm-hmm.
with passion
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
these industries, it's like almost like a birthright almost in a certain
Yeah.
way. So when we have that kind of commitment to that ideal that these industries is what gives us our riches, our convenience, or that Trinidad is one of the leaders because of that, in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we equate it now. And so when that is the default thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we wonder why it is, well, people just talk about diversity and so long they sing any song about diversity and thing. But again, it's really up to people to say that, oh, well, what really going on there now?
Mm-hmm.
I
Because
think
we don't really think about it, about diversifying the economy in the way we should, or how much things that really need to be remodeled in Trinidad, because we all know about the whole thing about you cannot get as much energy from solar and wind as much as you can get from fossil fuels or whatever. But at the same time too, how much of us are willing to buy an electric car if it is that they are available? How much people are going to not going to put the big engine and all of that and make the noise. And if you understand what I'm saying, you want to say something, Omar?
yeah, I was gonna say that I think the issue is that people get very defensive, I think, about the energy industry. And I think it's also this, I mean, people sometimes it's hard to hold two things true at the same time. I mean, it's completely correct that, things like capitalism and things like fossil fuels have resulted in, you know, economic, quote unquote, economic growth and getting people
Benefits,
out of,
benefits,
yeah,
yeah,
benefits.
for
But
society.
at the same time, you could admit that and also say that now we realize that is not the Eden that we thought it was. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
yeah.
that's you live and you learn. So I think you could you could have those two things in your head at the same time. And I think
But that's the
people
Right.
thing.
find very hard for people to admit that, oh, actually this mightn't be as great as we thought it probably is.
And that goes for so many things, like even
So many things, yeah.
colonialism. A lot of people say, well, if Christopher Columbus didn't come here, we would have never reached. I think the thing. I mean, and I'm like, yeah. So okay, certain things have paved the way for a lot of benefits for our society and so on, but they have also had ills and having ills. And in terms of our look at what happens with our environment, with our wildlife, with our flooding, right, with our just our emissions and our carbon footprint and thing. There are ills there that need to be addressed. And it doesn't mean that you have to at once stamp out, but as far as always said, he said in the first ever podcast we had back in the day, let's see, the only way you're going to stop is when you take your foot off the gas
Yeah.
now. You understand? So you can't just mash the brakes one time, and you can't just just don't just stop just so. You have to take your foot off the gas. So in a way too, we don't really show that we are in any position to take our foot off the gas in any way before mashing the brakes or anything like that, because of just the general citizenry and the fact that we cannot have a conversation where we could say, okay, these are the benefits, these are the ills, which one outweighing which one in what regard, and how do we come to some kind of amicable resolution in the short term, in the long term, whatever. Faraz, jump in there.
Yeah, well, I kind of get lost with a bunch of things and thoughts I was having in my head, but
Yeah.
as somebody who is being nature, right, and just taking in nature and taking the natural way and natural processes and that kind of thing, right, I notice that everything in the natural world is a closed loop, right? In terms of nutrients and wealth, whether it be livelihood or whatever, is always a closed loop. One thing is always feed into our next, I will feed into our next, I will feed into our next, and everything is always go back to the start, right? But if you look at what we commodify and what we have commodified, right, just a general flow of wealth from, let's just say, a mine in the Congo or something like that. That wealth is taken out of that country, taken to another country, and then it's manipulated, it's added to some other things, and then it's created something else. Next, you have a smartphone, and that wealth continues to feed up and up. So the manufacturers get more than the miners. Then the people who program it will get more than the manufacturers and whatever. But the wealth tends to concentrate at the very top, right? So you're getting these spectacularly rich people, right, who are in the minority, and then they have a bunch of other people who are making a lot less money. But then where does the wealth go after it accumulates at the top, right? To me, it's not a closed loop system, right? Because if let's just, are we using the example of the mines in Africa, right? By that logic, those mines and the people who are getting that raw material, they're supposed to be the richest of all, right? And it's not supposed to have that poverty, but the problem is that the system is not a closed loop system, and inherently then unsustainable. Because
What do you mean by a closed loop system?
a closed loop system is like a food chain,
Right.
right? So like if Bill Gates were to say, "Oh, I just call a random name," or Jeff
Yeah.
Bezos or Branson or whoever, these joyriding rich, what?
Yeah.
Once,
Yeah.
yeah, like if they were to distribute their wealth equitably to the people and the countries that got them wealthy, right? Would we be in the same situation as we are today? That would then be a closed loop system if they were to send their wealth elsewhere, to the bottom of that chain. Then, you know, like when an animal will feed on the next animal, but then the animal dies, and then, you know, the nutrients from that animal would then feed back into the soil, that will grow more trees that something will eat, and then something will eat that, and so on.
Yes.
All of those things are closed loop systems, and it's sustainable for millennia. But what we're doing in terms of the flow of wealth, which is our version of nutrients, because we
Our
create
resources.
resources, natural resources, we don't have a closed loop system. We're converting it into wealth, which is another problem, because how can we truly quantify how much, like, what is the price of clean air? What is the price of potable water?
Water.
Right? But, you know, like, people want to put price tags on things, and they say, well, if you have to invest in something, whether it is oil or renewable energy or a new vehicle or whatever it is, you have to do a cost benefit analysis. But that analysis is going to be impossible to do if you cannot truly quantify how much does a tree worth, and like how much is a tree worth in terms of its contribution to the stability of your environment. Right? You can't quantify that in terms of dollars and cents, and that's the problem with people trying to justify some kind of investment. And it's this disconnect between what is a cost of something, like the cost of life, and what is the price of something, which is something that can be in terms of dollars.
Well, I'll add a Gary reusable bottle, because and right now I could tell you $24. Probably a case for the price of water.
You brave to come and say that here, boy.
Yeah.
Water by the case. You're brave there, boy.
But let me ask this though, and I think I understand the different positions from where you all coming from, but just to bring it back to, because it's not an easy question to answer, which is Greta's dream being, this power residing with people. And let's just take Trinidad and Tobago, for example, right? And diversification is a long, winding discussion, but let's speak specifically to diversification of the power sector. And we have a situation where we depend on natural gas and oil and a lot of land-based wells and that kind of thing, in order to fuel our power needs. But we also seem to be stuck in this eternal track of growth in terms of power usage. Our power usage isn't stopping. And as I mentioned in a previous episode, power in Trinidad, because of the triple subsidy, is 13 times cheaper than the most expensive guy in the Caribbean, who is Barbuda. So we don't have any sort of incentives in order to diversify, and diversification all across the world historically only happens under pressure. So given that all of these subsidies are happening with the power industry, why would we diversify the power sector? And if we were to do that, what are we going to diversify into? Omar?
Yeah, well, I'm not a power specialist, but so we have again, so Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory to the Paris Convention, the Paris Agreement, and in that each country has to make determined contributions. So it's called nationally determined contributions to the same budget, the budget that you're talking about.
The NDPs.
Yeah, so we committed to reduce 15% in power from power generation, industry, and transport. I think it was. I think it's like 100 million tons or something, which is not very aggressive, but they're revising it now. Every 5 years you have to revise. But I think the fact of the matter is that it's like Faraz was saying, it's not a closed loop system. The fossil fuels are going back in the ground. The natural gas are going back in the ground. So at some point, we're going to reach that point where we're going to have to find alternative means. If we want to be stubborn and not plan for it, then is sort of we asked to catch at the end of the day. So it's only forward thinking to start planning for the event, the very real eventuality that is not going to be around anymore. And even if it is around, it might be cost more and more to actually extract it from wherever it is. And I think it's also important to realize that, again, Trinidad and Tobago is in a global community, and you have places that are now like the European Union. You sort of they're instituting like carbon borders, which talks about the fact that if you're importing things to the EU, exporting things to the EU, you have to be responsible for your carbon emissions related to that particular object or whatever. And I think that's going to be the trend. So unless you want to kind of carbon yourself out of the global economy as well, I think it's just a matter of being forward thinking, because it's not going to be around forever. It's probably going to get more expensive to produce, and you're going to not be competitive in a world where people are getting real stringent around carbon emissions and what's being allowed to come into wherever the economic space is. So I think, I know that there have been some ambitious plans for renewable energy, like the solar parks and whatever. But again, it feels like somebody had made I think it was Dennis who was talking about the fact that we should be trying to leverage as much innovation as possible to try to, again, people always say, Trinidad is one of the oldest producers. We have all this intellectual capital. People say that, developed small island states are on the forefront. We should be leading innovation. But we never show any of that. And I think that's such a missed opportunity. But for a country that gets so much,
Yeah. So let's go into that then, Omar. Let's create a hypothetical situation. 200 million US go in and drop on your door tomorrow. What 2 projects would you want to invest in for that 200 million US?
I think.
What do you think? Would you immediately go solar and wind?
For us here, yes, I think so. Just for producing energy. Because anything like stuff like biogas or whatever, you just need land and stuff for that, which we do have. And I think for me, I would invest as much of that money as possible into the green infrastructure, because let me tell you, as Faraz, who's our sort of wildlife expert, will probably know, we're in a real bad situation with a lot of the sort of ecosystem support that the country has, from mangroves to forests to wetlands, whatever, most of them in a bad state. And that's the kind of, if you have functioning watersheds, you wouldn't need a desalination plant, an expensive desalination plant. If you had functioning coral reefs, you ain't have to pay so much money for insurance because you're beach washing away. So and those things going to get worse and worse and worse. So I think it's important to the sort of common, the sort of parlance now is sort of nature-based solutions, which is where. So that's, remember somebody was talking about, why we need to care about emissions. Again, most places, even Trinidad with high per capita, we don't give out plenty. So our focus has to be on, literally, we can't control what's going on, so we have to adapt. And the most effective way to adapt is build back up your natural resilience. It's like anybody, you want to build your immune system first, and your immune system in the country is your natural ecosystems. Again, if you have a properly forested northern range, you think half the country going to get flooded out every time you rain for like 20 minutes or something. It's not going to happen. But we've degraded those things to the extent where we try to scramble to get hard infrastructure to start putting up, but it's never going to substitute, because like as Faraz says, you have economic solutions to price the services that nature provides, but you're never going to actually quantify the total cost. And so that's where I might put most of my money, to be very honest with you.
Yeah.
And then again, a solar park here there.
Yeah. Faraz, where you would put it 200 million?
Yeah, no, in totally in terms of ecosystem preservation, and because right now we on the precipice of ecological collapse, not only here but across the world, and you see it everywhere, and a lot of people can't, or maybe are unwilling to understand the exponential nature of these kinds of occurrences. Like there are certain things that we call tipping points for the climate, where certain things are going to become accelerated. So it's a non-linear scale now, right? So let's just say like the melting of an ice sheet. Be like, all right, cool. Well, the ice sheet is melting, but then the very fact that the ice sheet is melting reduces our ability to reflect heat back out into the atmosphere, thus further exacerbating the problem of warming, right? Because the ice is melting due to warming and so on. So a lot of things
Yeah.
snowball, and while, like, say, the initial effect might take 10 years to materialize, if left unchecked, then the next tipping point might be crossed in 2 years, and then
Right.
further to that might be a year, and then further to that might just be a couple of months, and before you know it, you're on a slippery slope, which is probably what we're on right now. And
Right.
like, we have not yet really fallen down into the abyss, but we slip in and slide in there real fast now, right? And even in terms of renewable energy, everything is going to cost some kind of energy. It's going to cost some kind of resources. It doesn't matter what kind of energy that you are interested in, whether it is hydroelectric dams or geothermal or biomass or wind or solar, whatever. Everything is going to it's going to entail some kind of use of resources, right? And it's not the best case scenario, but it's not the worst
Yeah.
case scenario either, right?
Yeah. But let me
Yeah.
just delve a little deeper in that though, for us. When you mention green infrastructure, okay, so 200 million going to improve the ecosystem. What would that actually be though? So let's say you
Right.
break that down into 50 million. What would you? Is it that you're importing trees and basically you're hiring a contractor to this state land area? I want you to populate it? Because I think we often hear the talk, but we usually reach the point of, okay, prepare a proper bankable project for me and
Yeah.
everybody stick. And that used to happen with the green fund a lot. The fund that, we decided to mortgage away, that we don't have access to anymore. But the question would be, if we were to create another green fund or get
Yeah.
access to another green fund, what is the actual bankable things
Yeah.
on land that we could spend on?
Right. So the key thing is going to be to, first of all, in terms of forest and deforestation, to halt deforestation, right? Because a forest is not a collection of trees. You can't
Hmm.
just plant a forest. No. You can plant trees, but trees don't make a forest. If you
Right,
understand what I'm saying, a
right,
forest
right,
by
right.
itself is an organism, right? That is made up of a multitude of different things. So the forests that exist currently, they are not simply a collection of trees. Now we have to stop looking at them as that, right? Um,
So you
so
would be paying the loggers, so that money will be going to the loggers to what? Like how? Where would that money go? That's what I'm trying to get to.
yeah, I am generally very poor with money things, because I have a very a big aversion to it, like, because
I know what I mean. I know what I
like,
mean.
I see it as the cause, the one root cause of
Hmm.
the unraveling of the climate is all for the pursuit of money, right? And
Right.
there's a
Mm.
minority that made all of these systems, and they are benefiting a lot from it, and they're making everybody like rat just going for a next piece of cheese, or like slaves waiting for a
Right.
next piece of bread.
Rat
We
race.
have to give we good bread, so we can't
No.
complain. We have
Right.
AC, we have this, we have a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's creature comforts for us now, but they don't really We need a total lifestyle change, right? The world need a whole a one-child
Right.
policy, all
Yeah.
kind of thing how to go on, and
Yeah.
that people don't want to have these conversations because there are huge systemic changes that have to be enacted to
So,
really
Yeah.
have
so,
any chance
so
of
aside
saving.
from deforestation for us, right? Because so deforestation, as you say, is more of a what you say, like is a more as a concept and the concept of the forest, right? So looking at a different perception. What other perceptions have to be adopted, or what other actual things, as he said, with actual programs to be implemented that will
Yeah,
cause some kind of thing.
is all like to prevent against ecological degradation. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to invest in the small man then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is against the whole model of how things are, right? You invest in a large scale, but you have to invest in the small farmer. You have to invest in the parlor people. You have to give people an incentive to not destroy the environment, the immediate environment, right? And
Right.
start a movement from like a grassroots movement, right? And at the end of the day too, a lot of it is about awareness and about a realistic situation, and say, hey, what now? Okay, all right. If you are worried about where your next meal is coming from, and we have 200 million US, we will help you provide a meal for you, right? If you agree to protect this piece of land, right? And instead of cutting down this piece of forest in this reserve, we have already, say, all right, is a reserve. We will compensate you then. We'll compensate you for housing a caiman in your drain. You understand? So,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Don't
but
kill it. Don't eat it. We will get something. We will get something that we could get, a little different to the actual wild animal that we're trying to get to stay in the ecosystem right now. You know, that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing, the overhunting, all of that. And
Yeah,
and
but
look,
all of those things
Muxor,
are very small issues in the grand scheme of things. There are a lot of other bigger things to consider too. Yeah, go ahead.
man like Muxor bringing up serious things here, where we reach with
Yeah,
eco and
serious
human
one.
friendly batteries for renewable energy systems. These kind of things is good. These are all things that you
Yeah.
hear about, but it's so foreign to our day-to-day understanding. I mean, like a simple
No,
thing,
but
like what?
yeah, no, but Qatar, so last week I actually saw a report. A local student had done it, where they were talking about an attempt from E-Tech in the early days to do a solar park, and this is a very serious thing. Where right now on one of E-Tech, I think it's Waterloo campus, not Waterloo, Mausika, and the Mausika campus, it actually have open fields right now of solar PV cells just abandoned, and they say that no one knows how to dispose of it. So it's actually
Yeah,
like a huge problem. So this what you're
right.
talking about is like a real problem that facing Trinidad now, boy, that Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. That if you decide to go solar, and I mean we know we're gonna have the renewable energy episode later on, but a big thing that we had to address on that is, the technology behind solar batteries is a serious one, because it ties back to the same thing that Faraz was talking about in terms of the sustainable acquisition of the material for it now, that is just mining to make these lithium ion batteries, which almost just as bad as that. And when it's come time to dispose, I mean, Omar, do they have any kind of technology on how to dispose of these things?
You mean globally?
Yeah, and anywhere, you know what I mean? Anything.
Well, I mean, I honestly can't answer that with any sort of level of
Because we just
authority.
can't
Right.
burn it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
or
no,
I don't
and I
know.
mean, even before we get there, I mean, there's a whole heap of human rights issues tied to the mining of these things as well. I mean, there's a lot of horror stories about children, 3, 4 years old, mining cobalt to put in your complete electric car. So you're buying an electric
Right.
car, feeling good about yourself, but you have a 5-year
Mm.
old mining the cobalt. So
Yeah.
again, like I think Butch was saying, it have no binary to it. You're gonna have
Yeah.
Right.
you'll have issues either way. But I think it's important to talk about it. So you can't just fool yourself and thinking I'm the savior of everything because I drive an electric car and buy a reusable bottle or whatever and boil in my water.
Right.
So you're
Yeah.
always going to have some kind of trade-off, something negative happening. But I mean, I remember seeing something where they were doing, they were trying to create a circular economy, which is this closed loop system idea. I remember somewhere they were trying to create a circular economy model for renewable energy batteries, but I honestly can't remember where that's at.
Yeah. I mean, I saw a question there from Izu de Gans on that we have wave power and nuclear. So nuclear power, fellas, I mean, that is a serious one. So let me talk about wave power, because I would have actually studied that. I did postgrad studies on coastal engineering, right? A lot of study has been done on the potential of the Caribbean to do wave power generation, and apparently, wave power generation could only be done on areas with large tidal ranges. Tidal ranges meaning we have diurnal tides, so it's from you have a high tide, two high tides, and two low tides, and whatnot. And basically, the difference between the two, what is the difference on the beach width? So that would be how your swell actually moves, and that actually moves the rotors of the wave power machines. And in Trinidad and Tobago in particular, we have very low tidal ranges, so we don't really have much potential for wave power here, as opposed to places off the island of is Oxnard, I think, off of the Isle of Wight in Britain, where they have those wave power equipment and so on. But over there, they have massive tidal ranges and whatnot. Nuclear, I think we definitely
Nuclear.
into that for the renewable energy episode, Cutter, because that,
Yeah.
I mean, Fukushima
That
will
nuclear. That
disagree, eh?
nuclear.
You
That
know,
nuclear. That gonna be
one.
nuclear. That gonna be nuclear. You know, instead of talk about that, you know, we're gonna go nuclear with that one. But you know,
yeah, sorry, go ahead. I just
Now
want to say
finish-
one thing.
yeah.
You know, like if how much we've considered things like indigenous knowledge in terms of the climate emergency that we're in right now. You know, because a lot of that indigenous knowledge was wiped out in the whole process of colonization and so on.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, when it comes to that's long gone, because those that since they died with their culture, with their knowledge and everything now.
Right.
You
But
know what I mean?
there are some sections that remain, you know, and there are indigenous elders speaking up especially in South America.
Definitely, yeah.
You know, like what they're trying to really like impart their knowledge of how to interact with the earth, right? And the earth as an organism, and the universe as an organism, and that oneness with that planet, you know. You know, and they believe many different things that from what we are told that we have to believe in the Western world. For example, you don't mine the earth, right? You don't dig into the earth, and you don't remove anything from the earth. If the earth has to give you something, it will well it up at its surface.
Yeah.
And you should not have to dig for it. You understand? Like simple things like that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how important that is for us. Actually, in the coming month or two, I'll be coming up on another podcast that I'm going to start, but from out here in Micronesia. And the title of the podcast is Wave Pilots. And the Wave Pilots is exactly what you talk about, Faraz, where apparently in ancient Polynesia, they had these guys called the Wave Pilots who actually used to navigate from, they're basically master wave finders. And they used to navigate. They had this guy called the wave pilot, and he used to navigate from place to place just from feeling the waves. So he would actually lie down in the boat and feel where the wave coming from, and actually direct the boat and things from there. So I mean, that is an example of the indigenous heights now, right? You know, and it have a lot of that. Yeah, it have a lot of that in the islands that I think we had to tap into to enforce some of the solutions we're talking about for the future now, right?
Because where with the civilization we live in is very, very, very far removed from anything like that. So it's going to be a process that will take years and years. But again, with Farah's analogy, the brakes and so on, and the lifting your foot off the gas and thing, and the perceptions, as you say, what is a forest? The understanding of nature. We have a long way to go, but it is very, very relevant. And I would like to thank everybody. We are coming up on a 135 minutes here or so, and we're going to look to close off. I know some people back might be hurting them and thing, and some of them fingers hurting too, but they can't stop typing, And we thank you guys for that. We thank you guys for all the comments tonight. Good night, Andre. Good to see you at this 11th hour. Right. I want to thank Omar for joining us today from the Copper Foundation. Omar, just succinctly tell us about the Copper Foundation in closing remarks, and that's what the Copper Foundation does and thing, so people could know when they hear the name.
Yeah, so we are a non-profit. We've been around for 21 years. We work primarily on environmental and sustainability issues in the Caribbean. We believe very heavily in Caribbean solutions for Caribbean problems. Perfect. So we do a lot of technical work on ecosystem science, but we also do a lot of work with communities and civil society groups, trying to get them activated, supporting them on standing up for their rights. And we're also getting into some more high-tech things around data science and technology. We're trying to dabble with things like AI for agriculture and mapping carbon emissions and all that kind of nice stuff. So that's basically what we do in a nutshell.
Well, we'll bring you on, Mr. AI Dennis, back to talk.
Yes, to talk some heights on that. That sounds like a big one.
Dennis on too much of a higher heights in that topic.
Right. And Faraz, brother, any closing remarks on your end?
There's just so much to talk about this whole issue, so we probably need a whole other episode, but
yeah, definitely.
I already commented the episode twice already, so I feel it might be a
I mean, you come 3 times actually already. But you can come anytime, brother. You can come anytime. Right. Woo. Thank you so much for coming through, brother. Leslie and Taurean, thank you guys for all the insight and all the time and so on for today's episode. Taurean, if we could see you on the screen for a second, it would be nice, because people just always tell me we didn't have you on the screen, and it was Taurean wasn't here. Yes, my brother. Taurean is here. Yeah. Where Taurean? You are the reason people come to watch your show, right? To see your face.
I know.
That's right.
All right. So from every Taurean, queue up a track if you have it now. You have any track there for me?
One second.
Yeah. So from all of us here, in the Heights Room tonight, we are going to have some usual cutting edge episodes coming up. I am in the search right now for the flat earther. Okay. I put it out on Facebook today. A lot of people, reacted and they put in their laugh face something, but them I know it's serious business with the flat earth guys. It's serious business. So, we will find him or her, and when we do, we'll be enlightened, right? Because in the Heights Room, we all about accepting everybody's different point of views and putting it out there and seeing how we can come to some kind of understanding. So from all of us in the Heights Room, we want to say thank you for tuning in. We want to also say once again, rest in peace to Brother Resistance, one of the most important artists to come out of Trinidad and Tobago. And Taurean, run the track.
Boom.
Oh God! Ring the bell.
Yes, sir. Later, love, fella. Later.